Chapter 8. Neither Bowed Nor Broken. How did it all happen? What is the story behind my conversion from the darling of the U.S. intelligence community to the enemy who symbolized everything that was bad in U.S. politics? The answer is complicated, but begins with the simple reality. I never wavered in my essential commitment to Panamanian nationalism. I never strayed from the conviction that my country was sovereign and had a right to decide its own future. There was no double dealing with the Americans, no involvement in killing political opponents, no drug dealing. My emergence as the enemy was the result of machinations by the American propaganda machine, combined with tactical mistakes on my side, opportunism by Panama's wealthy elite, and the bloodlust of the U.S. government under Reagan and Bush, which in turn led to an invasion of my country. The progression is not an easy one to track. There are a number of things to keep in mind. First, there was the peculiar nature of these rich Panamanians, English-speaking, American-educated patricians. These were people who sidled in with the Americans. They wanted to cozy up to power politics, be it via the U.S. ambassador or a visiting deputy secretary of state, and they made the Americans they wooed feel good in Panama, doing everything they could to make Panama City seem just as American as any true blue American city. These rich Panamanians hated the military and what we stood for. In the majority, we were not third-generation Panamanian patricians whose mostly American or European ancestors had served the United States designs on Panama at least since the beginning of the century. We were people of color, mestizos who reflected the diversity of our heritage, Spanish, Indian, and African. Of course, the military was tolerated when it was only a police force, as it was in the early days, before men like Torrijos and Boris Martinez dared to take a nationalist stance and express our independence from the United States. But after the revolution of 1968, we were more than a nuisance to the moneyed class. We were a mortal threat. We sought economic, social, and political equality for the same impoverished people they chose not to recognize. Liberation, nationalism, and social welfare meant nothing to them. This rift between us was ready to be exploited. Our Panamanian enemies soon had their chance. With the rise of the Reagan administration, there was constant residual anger toward Panama and the successors of Torrijos for the passage of the Panama Canal treaties. There was concern that Panama could not be counted on to go along with the American anti-communist agenda. The Panamanian wealthy elite made use of the ignorance of U.S. policymakers and the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil philosophy that reigned in the U.S. State Department. The rich power brokers said they were clean and we were dirty, that all corruption came from the military, that the wealthy bankers and car dealers and lawyers, men like Arias Calderon, Billy Ford, and Guillermo Endara, were all as pure as mountain snow. The Americans figured it had to be so. These were their friends and dinner companions, their tennis partners. They all had so much in common. They had to be telling the truth. Besides the connivance of the oligarchy, there was a second factor, the change in the perception of my usefulness to the United States. At first, I was still on the useful list for the Americans. I was regularly invited to Washington and elsewhere for meetings and to give speeches and provide analysis. We had regular meetings with our counterparts at the U.S. Southern Command and coordinated with them in accord with provisions of the canal treaties. As we have seen, I continued to provide significant help to the United States on intelligence matters. I had excellent relations with CIA station chiefs in Panama. Joe Kiyonaga, Brian Bramson, Jerry Svart, and Don Winters being among the ones I knew best. William Casey and his aides knew they could count on us when they needed us, and they respected us. The Panamanian Defense Forces all gave strong, consistent support to the Drug Enforcement Administration. This was documented in the many interchanges of correspondence between me and my subordinates and U.S. officials. In addition, they recognized that we were not only cooperating, but providing intelligence that helped catch and target drug kingpins. In December 1984, 1 year after I became commander, Panama provided information to the United States on the activities of Jorge Luis Ochoa of the Medellin cocaine cartel and Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela of Cali, who were setting up drug operations in Spain. As a result, the two men were arrested in Spain for extradition to the United States. Mysteriously, because of U.S. negligence, Colombian authorities won control of the case and had both men extradited back to Bogotá, where they were swiftly released. Shortly thereafter, Panama took another major step against the Colombian drug traffickers. The government voided the charter of the first Inter-Americans Bank in Panama City after an investigation showed that it was being used by another Cali drug dealer, Jose Santa Cruz Londono, to launder drug profits. The lawyer for the first Inter-Americans Bank was Rogelio Cruz, who became Attorney General of Panama after the United States invaded Panama. And its directors were Guillermo Endara, the man installed by the Americans as president, and his associates Jaime Arias Calderon and Hernan Delgado. The DEA drug fight in Latin America was greatly enhanced by Panama. We encouraged the participation for the first time of other countries in the region, who were skeptical about working with Americans for fear that doing so would allow spies to operate in their countries. I was the one who suggested and organized the first hemispheric drug conference at Contadora in 1982. It went so well that the United States decided to adopt it as an annual event. The second year, the meeting was held in Venezuela. Officials of the anti-drug campaign in the United States were able to hear there for the first time from the Latin American drug police themselves their problems, their questions, their analysis. A great wealth of information was gathered, and the contacts established were valuable, but only after the meetings were organized by me. Previously, Latin American countries had refused to share intelligence with each other, let alone with the Americans. Not only were there regional rivalries, but also they feared the United States would make use of information gathered to destabilize their governments. But the winds of American intervention in Panama were already blowing when I took over as commander of the Panamanian Defense Forces. The wealthy classes alone would not have been enough to sabotage me. They needed a willing reception in Washington. Operating on their own time schedule and creating the facts as they went along, the Americans slowly moved toward attacking me and working with our Panamanian enemies for my downfall. First, I refused to play along with their game in Central America. I committed cardinal sins. I said no too many times. I refused to allow them to use Panama as a base for attacks on Nicaragua and rebels in El Salvador. The closing of the Panama-based School of the Americas in 1982 was mandated as one of the first tangible changes under the Torrijos-Carter Treaties of 1977 to 1978. The United States was well aware of the provision, but the Reagan administration just couldn't swallow it. As determined and proud as we were to follow through with Torrijos' legacy, the United States didn't want any of this to happen. They wanted an extension of a renegotiation for the installation, saying that with their growing war preparations in Central America, they still needed it. But the School of the Americas was an embarrassment to us. We didn't want a training ground for death squads and repressive right-wing militaries on our soil. The basic U.S. proposal was for a 15-year extension in the operation of the School of the Americas. In effect, this would extend the U.S. presence in Panama against the spirit of the Canal Treaties. The only way we would accept such a school, I told them, was if it were reconstituted. We will make it a school for social development, I told the Americans. It will have a Panamanian director. There will be classic military training, but also lessons in civic action, healthcare, rural medicine, and aid in creating peasant cooperatives. We wanted to convert this international monstrosity for repression and murder into something completely different. The United States was appalled. They wanted to train demolition teams and snipers and terrorist squads to fight the Nicaraguan government. I was adamantly opposed. And this became the first no that the United States heard me utter. It was a surprise for them that sitting at the negotiating table with my friends, the Americans, I should say no, that I had the nerve to demand compliance with the letter and spirit of the Torrijos-Carter treaties. They saw it as disobedience on my part, and they took it very badly. "General," they told me, "you've taken a very radical position. What has happened?"